This is our spinal cord. The spinal cord is made up of 3 parts. It is made up of the central canal, which is filled with the cerebrospinal fluid. It has the H gray matter. The top part or the top parts of the H gray matter are called the dorsal horns, and the bottom parts are called the ventral horns. And then from there, the spinal cord, it's made up of the white matter. This white matter is made up of the myelinated axons, whereas the gray matter, it's made up of the cell bodies. So now, there are 2 nerves or spinal nerves, one from each side, which enter the spinal cord. This nerve has the dorsal part, which is called the dorsal root. So inside the dorsal root, we find a sensory neuron. And then again, it has the bottom part, which is called the ventral root. It is inside this ventral root where we do find the motor neuron. So this spinal cord is divided into left and right by means of 2 fissures. The top fissure is called the dorsal fissure, and then the bottom one is called the ventral fissure. So in the H gray matter of the spinal cord, there is a neuron there which is called what? An interneuron. So now, coming to what is called a reflex arc. What is a reflex arc? A reflex arc is a path along which nerve impulses are carried from a receptor to an effector so as to bring about a reflex action. So, a reflex arc is regarded as being the functional unit of the nervous system. So now the components of a reflex arc that you need to know about are the receptor. The function of a receptor is to carry impulses. The function of a receptor is to convert a stimulus into an impulse. And then from there we do have another component of a reflex arc, which is called the sensory neuron. So the function of a sensory neuron, as we have just said, it is to take impulses from a receptor to the spinal cord. And then another component of a reflex arc, it's an interneuron. So the interneuron is found right inside the spinal cord. So the function of this interneuron, it is to connect a sensory neuron to a motor neuron, or we can say it is to take impulses from the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. And then another component of a reflex arc it's a motor neuron. So the motor neuron takes impulses from where? From the spinal cord or from the connector neuron to where? To an effector. So now our effector in this case is what? It's our muscle. And then from there we do have what? We do have the last component of a reflex arc, which is called what? Which is called an effector. So the effector, it's a muscle or a gland. The main function of a muscle is to contract. So now when it contracts, it enables you to pull your hand away from a stimulus. So now let us now try to explain how are you going to respond to a stimulus. For instance, if maybe you are pricked by a what? By a nail. So number one, okay, what is going to happen if maybe you put your finger on a throwing pin? The pain receptors in the skin is going to receive that pain, which is called a stimulus, and then it is going to convert that pain called a stimulus into what? Into an impulse. And then from there, the impulse will then be carried by a neuron, which enters the dorsal root of the spinal cord, called a sensory neuron. So the sensory neuron will transmit impulses from where? From the receptor to where? To your spinal cord. So in the spinal cord, there is an interneuron. So the interneuron will transmit impulses to where? To the motor neuron. And then the motor neuron will leave the spinal cord via the ventral root to transmit impulses to where? To your muscle. And then the muscle will contract. So now when it contracts, it is going to be pulled away from a what? From a throwing pin. So now the action whereby you withdraw your hand from a throwing pin is called a reflex action. So reflex action, it's a quick automatic reaction to a stimulus received by a what? By a receptor. So we are now left with 5 minutes before our break.